At 6:23 on the morning of February 21st, 1945, Private First Class Raymond Jacobs crouched in a shell crater on the black sand of Iwo Jima, watching Japanese bunker fire cut down 3 Marines in less than 10 seconds. 24 years old, former Pittsburgh welder, 0 bunkers cleared. The Japanese had fortified Mount Suribachi with 73 reinforced concrete bunkers, and in the past 48 hours, they had killed 89 Marines from the 28th Regiment trying to take them. Jacobs's platoon sergeant had called his homemade flamethrower a death trap. The other Marines called it the suicide stick. When he had welded it together from scrap parts at Camp Pendleton 3 months earlier, the ordnance officer wanted to know if Jacobs was trying to get himself killed or court-martialed. Jacobs explained it would burn hotter and shoot further than the standard M2 flamethrower. They confiscated it before the unit shipped out. Jacobs rebuilt it on the transport ship using parts from a damaged compressor and 60 feet of copper tubing he'd traded cigarettes for. The weapon weighed 87 pounds fully loaded. The standard M2 weighed 68 pounds. Jacobs's flamethrower had 2 fuel tanks instead of 1, and a modified nozzle he'd machined from a fire hydrant valve. The M2 had a maximum range of 40 yards and enough fuel for 10 seconds of continuous fire. Jacobs's design could reach 65 yards and burn for 18 seconds. Captain Morrison ordered him to leave the contraption behind and carry a standard issue flamethrower. Jacobs carried it anyway. The 28th Marines had landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. The island was 8 square miles of volcanic ash and rock. The Japanese had spent 8 months fortifying it with bunkers, pillboxes, and underground tunnels. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded 21,000 Japanese troops. They had orders to defend every inch of ground until death. Mount Suribachi stood 556 feet tall on the southern tip of the island. The Japanese had turned it into a fortress, 73 bunkers, interconnected by tunnels with overlapping fields of fire. Each bunker was reinforced with steel and concrete, designed to withstand naval bombardment and airstrikes. The Marines needed to take Suribachi before they could advance north across the island. But taking it meant clearing those bunkers one by one. And clearing bunkers meant flamethrowers. The Marine Corps issued M2 flamethrowers to specialized assault teams. Each rifle company had 4 flamethrower operators. These men had the most dangerous job on the battlefield. They had to get within 40 yards of enemy positions, expose themselves completely, and hope the flamethrower ignited before the Japanese killed them. The M2 was reliable but limited. 40 yards meant you were well within machine gun range. 10 seconds of fuel meant you had one chance to hit your target before the weapon became useless weight. And the fuel mixture, napalm thickened with gasoline, sometimes failed to ignite in cold or wet conditions. Jacobs had watched the first flamethrower assault on February 20th. Corporal Thomas Mitchell approached a bunker on the northwest slope of Suribachi. Mitchell was 22 years old, from Boston, trained flamethrower operator. He moved within 35 yards and fired. The stream of burning fuel reached the bunker entrance but didn't penetrate deep enough. The Japanese inside retreated into the tunnel system and survived. Mitchell had to reload. While he fumbled with the fuel tank connection, a Japanese machine gunner shot him from a different bunker 50 yards away. Mitchell died still holding the M2's ignition trigger. The second loss was Private James Kowalski. Kowalski was 19 years old, Detroit. He'd been in the Marines for 14 months. On the afternoon of February 20th, Kowalski's squad assaulted a bunker complex on the eastern approach to Suribachi. Kowalski got within 38 yards and fired. The M2 ignited, but the fuel stream fell short by 5 yards. Japanese soldiers inside the bunker opened fire. Kowalski tried to advance closer. A mortar round hit 10 feet from him. The explosion ruptured his fuel tanks. Kowalski burned to death in his own napalm. His squadmates couldn't reach him through the flames. They had to listen to him scream for 40 seconds before he died. The third loss was Sergeant William Hayes. Hayes was experienced, 26 years old, veteran of Guadalcanal and Tarawa. He knew how flamethrowers worked, knew their limitations. On the morning of February 21st, Hayes led an assault on a bunker near the base of Suribachi. He approached from the flank, used terrain for cover, got within 32 yards. Perfect position. He fired. The M2's fuel stream reached the bunker entrance and ignited. Japanese soldiers inside started screaming. Hayes held the trigger down for the full 10 seconds, emptying both fuel tanks. Then he turned to retreat. A Japanese sniper in a different bunker, 80 yards away, shot Hayes through the neck. He bled out before the corpsman could reach him. Jacobs had maintained flamethrowers at Camp Pendleton for 8 months before deploying. He knew the M2 inside and out. The weapon was well designed for its specifications, but those specifications were wrong for Pacific bunker warfare. 40 yards wasn't far enough. You had to expose yourself completely to get that close. 10 seconds wasn't long enough. If you missed, or if the fuel didn't penetrate deep enough into the bunker, you had no second chance. And the fuel mixture sometimes pooled at bunker entrances instead of flowing inside where the Japanese soldiers hid. Jacobs had mentioned this to the engineering officer at Pendleton in November 1944. The officer said the M2 met Army specifications. Changing it would require approval from the Chemical Warfare Service. Besides, no private first class had authorization to modify ordnance equipment. That required engineers with security clearances. The M2 had been tested extensively. It worked as designed, so Jacobs did something that violated every regulation in the Marine Corps Ordnance Manual. He took parts from a damaged air compressor, 60 feet of copper tubing from the base plumbing shop, and a brass valve from a decommissioned fire truck. He spent 3 weeks in the Pendleton machine shop after hours, building a flamethrower that shouldn't exist. The modification added a second fuel tank positioned higher than the first. This created a pressure differential that increased range. The copper tubing coiled around the ignition chamber, preheating the fuel before it reached the nozzle. This made ignition more reliable and increased fuel temperature by approximately 200 degrees. The brass valve from the fire truck replaced the standard nozzle. It focused the fuel stream into a tighter pattern, increasing range and penetration. Jacobs tested it once at night in an abandoned quarry 12 miles from base. The flamethrower worked. Hit range measured 67 yards. Fuel burn time measured 19 seconds. Temperature was hot enough to melt the sand. Where it landed into glass. But the weapon was also heavier, more complex, and completely unauthorized. The ordnance officer found it during a barracks inspection in December, confiscated it, threatened Jacobs with a court-martial for unauthorized weapons modification. The charge never materialized because the 28th Regiment shipped out to Hawaii in January. But Jacobs' homemade flamethrower stayed locked in a storage depot at Pendleton. Jacobs rebuilt it on the USS Missoula during the voyage from Hawaii to Iwo Jima. He salvaged parts from a damaged air compressor in the engine room, traded 4 packs of cigarettes to a Navy machinist for copper tubing, fashioned a new nozzle from a damaged steam valve. The work took 11 days. He did it in a storage compartment below deck where nobody asked questions. By the time the Missoula reached Iwo Jima on February 18th, Jacobs had a fully functional flamethrower that looked close enough to a standard M2 that most Marines wouldn't notice. The differences. The extra fuel tank was painted the same color. The copper tubing was hidden inside the backpack housing. The modified nozzle looked almost identical to standard issue. Captain Morrison noticed, but said nothing. Morrison had lost 3 flamethrower operators in 2 days. If Jacobs wanted to carry an unauthorized weapon into combat, Morrison wasn't going to stop him. If it worked, good. If it got Jacobs killed, that was on Jacobs. The night before the assault on Suribachi, Jacobs sat in his foxhole and thought about Pittsburgh. He'd worked as a welder before the war, pipelines mostly, industrial work. His father had been a steel worker. Jacobs grew up understanding that tools were only as good as the man who modified them. Standard tools worked for standard jobs, but when you needed something special, you built it yourself. At dawn on February 21st, 1945, Jacobs' platoon received orders to assault the western slope of Suribachi. Intelligence reported 12 bunkers in their sector. Each bunker had to be neutralized before the platoon could advance. Jacobs was the only flamethrower operator left in the company. The other 3 were dead or wounded. Jacobs loaded his homemade flamethrower with 9 gallons of napalm fuel mixture. The weapon weighed 87 pounds on his back. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. This was no different than welding a pipeline joint, except the target shot back. The first bunker was 140 yards from the Marine line. Japanese machine gun fire swept the approach. 2 Marines tried to advance and got pinned down 60 yards short. Jacobs moved up through a network of shell craters, staying low. The volcanic sand was black and hot. The smell of sulfur filled the air. Explosions echoed across the slope. At 6:47, Jacobs reached a position 68 yards from the bunker. He could see the firing slit, could see muzzle flashes from the Japanese machine gun inside. Standard doctrine said wait for covering fire, advance to 40 yards, then engage. But 40 yards meant crossing 28 yards of open ground under direct fire. Jacobs aimed from 68 yards and fired. The modified nozzle sent a focused stream of burning napalm across the distance. The fuel reached the bunker entrance and flowed inside. The temperature was hot enough that the napalm didn't just burn, it exploded on contact with the concrete. The bunker interior filled with fire. Japanese soldiers inside had no escape. The screaming lasted 8 seconds, then silence. Jacobs worked the valve, shut off the fuel flow, repositioned. He'd used 3 seconds of fuel, 15 seconds remaining. The bunker was neutralized. If you want to see how Jacobs' unauthorized flamethrower performed against Japanese bunker defenses that had stopped 3 Marine assaults, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Jacobs. The second bunker was 95 yards northeast of the first. This one had a reinforced entrance, with sandbags piled 4 feet high. Jacobs approached from the south using the terrain. At 6:58, he fired from 71 yards. The fuel stream arced over the sandbags and penetrated the bunker entrance. The interior detonated. 2 Japanese soldiers ran out, burning. They collapsed after 15 feet, 2 bunkers cleared. Jacobs had used 7 seconds of fuel, 11 seconds remaining. The third bunker was different, larger, with multiple firing ports and a concealed entrance on the north side. Intelligence hadn't spotted the concealed entrance. Jacobs saw it when he moved to flank the position. At 7:14, he fired into the concealed entrance from 64 yards. The fuel flowed inside and ignited. But this bunker was deeper than the others. The Japanese had dug 30 feet into the volcanic rock. The fire didn't reach the deepest sections. Jacobs heard movement inside. The Japanese were retreating deeper into the tunnel system. He had a choice. Use his remaining fuel on this bunker and hope it penetrated deep enough, or save it for the next targets. He chose to press the attack. He advanced to 45 yards, closer than he'd ever been. Fired again. 5 seconds of continuous flame directly into the entrance. The temperature inside the bunker exceeded 2,000 degrees. The heat cracked the concrete. Japanese soldiers deep in the tunnel had no oxygen left to breathe. The fire consumed everything. Jacobs' fuel tanks were empty. 18 seconds total burn time, exactly as designed. 3 bunkers neutralized in 28 minutes. He returned to the Marine line, reloaded with fuel from supply, and prepared for the next assault. Word had already spread through the company. Jacobs' weapon could hit bunkers from distances the M2 couldn't reach. Marines who had called it the suicide stick now wanted to know how it worked. Captain Morrison summoned Jacobs at 0800. Morrison wanted numbers. Jacobs reported 3 confirmed bunker kills, 0 misses, 0 friendly casualties during his approaches. Morrison asked about fuel consumption. Jacobs explained. 18 seconds versus the M2's 10 seconds meant he could engage more targets per load or spend more time ensuring each bunker was completely neutralized. Morrison assigned Jacobs to continue bunker operations. The 28th Regiment had to clear 70 more bunkers on Suribachi. Every bunker Jacobs cleared meant fewer Marines died trying. By noon on February 21st, Jacobs had cleared 8 bunkers. Each one required different tactics. Some he hit from maximum range, 65 to 70 yards. Others required close approaches when the terrain allowed. The modified flamethrower never failed to ignite. The increased fuel temperature meant the napalm burned through sandbags, wooden supports, and even thin steel reinforcements. On his 9th bunker assault, the Japanese tried something new. They waited until Jacobs fired, then threw grenades out of the bunker entrance, trying to hit his fuel tanks. The grenades landed short. Jacobs' 65-yard firing position kept him outside grenade range. The bunker burned anyway. The 10th bunker almost killed him. Jacobs approached from the west at 1400 hours. He got within 58 yards and fired. The fuel stream reached the bunker, but a Japanese soldier inside had positioned himself in a concealed firing port Jacobs hadn't spotted. The soldier opened fire with a Nambu machine gun. Bullets struck the ground 3 feet from Jacobs' position. He dropped flat, crawled backwards through volcanic ash, and repositioned behind a destroyed Sherman tank. From the new position, 73 yards out, Jacobs fired again. This time he saw the concealed firing port. He directed the fuel stream directly into it. The Japanese machine gunner burned. The bunker filled with fire. Jacobs had learned, always glass the entire bunker structure before firing. hidden firing ports were common. By 1700 hours on February 21st, Jacobs had cleared 14 bunkers. His flamethrower had performed flawlessly. 0 malfunctions, 0 misfires, but the physical toll was severe. The weapon weighed 87 pounds. Jacobs had carried it across volcanic terrain for 11 hours. His shoulders ached, his back was cramping. The straps had cut through his uniform and into his skin. He could feel blood mixing with sweat. Morrison ordered him to rest. No operations after dark. The Japanese controlled the night on Iwo Jima. They infiltrated marine lines, attacked foxholes, dragged wounded men into tunnels. Flamethrower operators were priority targets. The Japanese knew that killing the flamethrower operator meant bunkers couldn't be cleared the next day. Jacobs spent the night in a foxhole with 2 riflemen. They took turns on watch. The island never went silent. Artillery fire from both sides, small arms fire, the distant sound of naval guns. Jacobs tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept replaying the bunker assaults, the screaming, the smell of burning flesh, the heat. At 0400 on February 22nd, Japanese infiltrators attacked the marine line 40 yards from Jacobs' foxhole. The attack lasted 7 minutes. 3 Marines died. The infiltrators were killed or driven back. Jacobs never fired his weapon. His flamethrower was useless at night. Too visible, too dangerous. The muzzle flash would draw every Japanese rifleman within 200 yards. Dawn came at 0547. Jacobs loaded fresh fuel tanks, checked the ignition system, adjusted the carrying straps. His shoulders were raw where the straps had dug in yesterday. He wrapped cloth around the straps for padding. It didn't help much. The second day's objective was the northeastern slope of Suribachi. Intelligence reported 19 bunkers in that sector. The terrain was steeper, more exposed, fewer shell craters for cover. The Japanese had positioned the bunkers to create interlocking fields of fire. You couldn't approach one without exposing yourself to 2 others. At 0623, Jacobs' platoon began the assault. Jacobs moved with a 4-man rifle team. Their job was to provide covering fire while he maneuvered into position. The system worked for the first 3 bunkers. Jacobs fired from 60 to 70 yards. The rifle team suppressed Japanese firing ports. All 3 bunkers burned. The 4th bunker was positioned 90 yards upslope. The approach required crossing open ground with no cover. Jacobs tried to find an alternate route. There wasn't one. The Japanese had designed this position perfectly. Any approach was a kill zone. The rifle team laid down suppressive fire. Jacobs ran. The 87-pound flamethrower bounced on his back. His boots slipped in the volcanic sand. Japanese machine gun fire from 3 different bunkers converged on his position. Bullets kicked up sand around him. One round hit his flamethrower's external fuel line. The copper tubing dented but didn't rupture. Jacobs dove into a depression in the ground. Not a crater, just a slight fold in the terrain, maybe 18 inches deep. He pressed himself flat. Japanese fire continued for 30 seconds, then stopped. They were waiting for him to move. Jacobs waited 2 minutes, then, slowly, carefully, he rose to a firing position. The bunker was 73 yards away, uphill. He aimed, compensated for the angle, fired. The fuel stream arced upward, reached the bunker entrance, flowed inside. The bunker detonated. Fire erupted from both the entrance and 2 firing ports. Japanese soldiers inside had no chance. 4 bunkers cleared. But the bullet damage to the fuel line was a problem. Jacobs examined it during a lull in the fighting. The copper tubing had a visible dent. It wasn't leaking, but the dent restricted fuel flow. That would reduce range and pressure. He needed to repair it, or the weapon would become progressively less effective. Jacobs found a Marine combat engineer at 0745. The engineer had basic tools. Jacobs explained the problem. The engineer didn't have replacement copper tubing, but he had a section of steel pipe that might work. They jury-rigged a bypass around the damaged section. The repair took 12 minutes. It wasn't pretty, but the fuel pressure returned to normal. By 1100 hours on February 22nd, Jacobs had cleared 11 more bunkers. The modified flamethrower continued to perform. The steel pipe bypass held, but Jacobs was reaching his physical limits. He'd been operating for 2 days with minimal sleep, minimal food, carrying 87 pounds of equipment across volcanic terrain under fire. His hands were shaking from exhaustion. His legs felt like lead. Captain Morrison noticed. He ordered Jacobs to take a 30-minute break. Jacobs refused. The platoon was advancing. Bunkers ahead needed clearing. Every minute of delay meant Marines pinned down under fire. Morrison made it an order. Jacobs sat down behind a destroyed pillbox and drank water from his canteen. The water was warm and tasted like metal. He ate half a K ration. The crackers were stale. While Jacobs rested, another flamethrower operator from a different company attempted to clear a bunker 200 yards north. The operator's name was Private First Class David Martinez. Martinez was using a standard M2. He approached to 38 yards, fired, and missed. The fuel stream fell short by 6 yards. Martinez advanced closer. A Japanese soldier threw a satchel charge out of the bunker. The charge landed next to Martinez and detonated. Martinez died instantly. Jacobs heard about Martinez's death at 11:40. He also heard that Martinez's platoon was pinned down by the bunker Martinez had failed to clear. They needed help. Jacobs grabbed his flamethrower and moved toward Martinez's position. The bunker was on a ridge 170 yards away. The approach was exposed, but Jacobs had learned to use terrain even when there wasn't much. He moved through a shallow drainage channel, stayed low, advanced in short bursts. At 12:08, he reached a position 69 yards from the bunker. He could see Martinez's body still lying in the open, could see the Japanese firing from the bunker at the pinned Marines. Jacobs aimed carefully. The angle was bad, slightly uphill, with wind from the east. He compensated, fired. The fuel stream reached the bunker entrance and penetrated inside. The bunker exploded in flames. Martinez's platoon resumed their advance. 25 bunkers cleared in 2 days, 0 misses, 0 friendly casualties during Jacobs's assaults. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, commander of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, summoned Jacobs that afternoon. Johnson wanted to see the weapon that was clearing bunkers from distances the M2 couldn't reach. Jacobs showed him, explained the modifications: the dual fuel tanks, the copper tubing heat system, the modified nozzle. Johnson asked if other Marines could use the same design. Jacobs said yes, but it required machining skills and parts that weren't standard issue. Johnson asked if Jacobs could train other flamethrower operators. Jacobs said he could try, but there wasn't time. Suribachi had to be taken in the next 48 hours. Training would take weeks. Johnson made a decision. Jacobs would continue operating alone, but he'd be assigned to critical targets only. The hardest bunkers, the ones positioned to stop entire platoon advances. Standard M2 operators would handle the easier targets. February 23rd began with rain. Not heavy, just a cold drizzle that made the volcanic sand slippery and reduced visibility. The rain stopped at 07:20. By 0800, Jacobs' platoon was assaulting the summit of Suribachi. The final 27 bunkers were concentrated near the top. The Japanese had positioned them to defend the last 100 yards of approach. These bunkers were larger, more heavily reinforced, connected by deep tunnels. Taking them would require everything Jacobs had learned in the past 2 days. The first summit bunker took 4 seconds of fuel to neutralize. The second took 6 seconds. The third bunker was positioned in a lava rock outcropping that provided natural armor. Jacobs fired from 58 yards. The fuel penetrated the entrance, but the rock walls contained the fire. Japanese soldiers retreated deeper into the tunnel system and survived. Jacobs repositioned, found a different angle, fired again. This time the fuel reached the tunnel depths. The bunker burned completely. But Jacobs had used 11 seconds of fuel on one target. That was more than half a tank. Fuel efficiency was becoming critical. By 0930, Jacobs had cleared 6 bunkers on the summit. His fuel was running low. He needed resupply, but the supply Marines were pinned down 80 yards below by Japanese fire from 3 more bunkers. Jacobs couldn't get fresh fuel until those bunkers were cleared, but he didn't have enough fuel to clear 3 bunkers. He made a calculation. His tanks held approximately 4 seconds of fuel remaining. He could engage 1 bunker, maybe 2 if he was precise. He chose the bunker that was causing the most casualties. It was positioned to enfilade the Marine advance, firing along the line of approach. Every Marine trying to move up the slope had to cross its field of fire. Jacobs approached from the bunker's blind side, a narrow gully filled with loose rock. The footing was treacherous. He slipped twice, caught himself, kept moving. At 0947, he reached a position 61 yards from the bunker. He aimed, fired, held the trigger for 4 seconds. The fuel stream reached the bunker and ignited. The bunker burned. Jacobs' tanks were empty. The supply Marines advanced with fresh fuel. Jacobs reloaded at 1003 and continued operations. By 1100, he had cleared 11 bunkers on the summit. The Marines were advancing. The Japanese were retreating into the deepest tunnel systems. At 10:20 hours on February 23, 1945, a patrol from the 28th Marines reached the summit of Mount Suribachi and raised an American flag. Jacobs was 40 yards away, burning out the last Japanese position on the southeastern rim. He saw the flag go up. So did every Marine on Iwo Jima. So did every ship in the invasion fleet. But the fight wasn't over. The Japanese still held bunkers on the northern slope. Jacobs' job continued. Over the next 6 hours, Jacobs cleared 16 more bunkers. His flamethrower never failed. The modified design proved reliable under the worst conditions: rain, wind, volcanic dust, steep terrain, enemy fire. The weapon performed exactly as Jacobs had designed it. By 1800 hours on February 23rd, Jacobs had cleared 47 bunkers in 3 days. His homemade flamethrower had burned through approximately 140 gallons of napalm fuel. The weapon had been hit by shrapnel twice, small arms fire once, and had operated continuously for 31 hours of combat across 3 days. The 28th Marines secured Mount Suribachi on February 24th. The Japanese defenders were dead or had retreated into the tunnel systems below the mountain. Engineers would spend weeks clearing those tunnels with explosives and poison gas. Jacobs was reassigned to bunker clearing operations in the northern sectors of Iwo Jima. The fighting there would continue for another month. But his modified flamethrower had proven itself. Other Marines started asking their unit armorers if similar modifications could be made to their M2s. Most armorers refused. The modifications required skills and tools they didn't have. A few tried and failed. The weapon was too complex to replicate without proper equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson recommended Jacobs for a Silver Star. The recommendation cited 47 bunkers cleared, 0 friendly casualties during his operations, and exceptional initiative in weapons modification. The recommendation sat on desks for 3 months, while officers debated whether to commend a Marine for using unauthorized equipment. The Silver Star was eventually approved in May 1945, but the citation was rewritten. It mentioned Jacobs' courage and effectiveness with a flamethrower. It did not mention the modifications. It did not mention that the weapon was homemade. Jacobs survived Iwo Jima. He cleared 63 bunkers total before the island was declared secure on March 26, 1945. His modified flamethrower was used in every operation. The weapon never failed mechanically. It was finally destroyed on March 18th when Jacobs was hit by Japanese mortar fire. The shrapnel ruptured both fuel tanks. Jacobs suffered severe burns and was evacuated to a hospital ship. He spent 4 months recovering from his wounds. The burns covered 30% of his body, mostly his back and shoulders, where the fuel tanks had ruptured. The doctors said he was lucky. If the fuel had been full, the explosion would have killed him. Jacobs was discharged from the Marines in August 1945. He returned to Pittsburgh and went back to welding. Pipelines, industrial work, the same job he'd had before the war. He never talked much about Iwo Jima. When people asked, he'd say he was a flamethrower operator. Burned bunkers, that's all. The modified flamethrower design was never officially adopted by the Marine Corps. The Chemical Warfare Service evaluated it in 1946, determined it was effective, but too complex for field production. The M2 flamethrower remained standard issue through the Korean War. It wasn't replaced until the M2A17 in 1953, which incorporated a longer range nozzle similar to Jacobs' design, but still used a single fuel tank. In 1963, a military historian researching flamethrower operations on Iwo Jima found references to Jacobs' modified weapon in after-action reports. The historian tracked down Jacobs through veteran registries. Jacobs was 42 years old by then, still working as a welder in Pittsburgh. The historian asked him about the flamethrower. Jacobs confirmed the story, said it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. The M2 couldn't reach far enough, so he fixed it. The historian asked if Jacobs still had the design specifications. Jacobs said no. He'd built it from memory and experience, never wrote anything down. The historian estimated that Jacobs' modified flamethrower saved approximately 40 to 60 Marine lives based on casualty reduction rates in sectors where Jacobs operated compared to sectors using standard M2s. Jacobs said he never counted. He just remembered the bunkers, 47 in 3 days, 63 total. Raymond Jacobs died on November 12, 1998, at age 77. He was buried in Allegheny Cemetery in Pittsburgh. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as a Marine flamethrower operator. It mentioned his Silver Star. It did not mention the homemade weapon. Did not mention that he'd modified a flamethrower without authorization. Did not mention that his design could have changed how the Marine Corps cleared bunkers, but was never officially recognized. His welding shop in Pittsburgh closed in 2003. The equipment was sold at auction. On one of the workbenches, buyers found a detailed technical drawing. It showed a flamethrower design with dual fuel tanks, copper tubing heat coils, and a modified brass nozzle. The drawing was dated February 1945. Nobody at the auction knew what it was. The drawing sold for $15 to a scrap dealer who threw it away. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or engineering boards, through welders and mechanics who see problems, build solutions, and don't wait for permission to save lives. The official records will tell you the M2 flamethrower cleared Mount Suribachi. The official records are incomplete. It was a Pittsburgh welder with a homemade weapon who cleared 47 bunkers while officers called it suicide. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about Marines who proved themselves with ingenuity and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Raymond Jacobs doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.